Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Daviess County Fiscal Court Budget Work Session, and today is April 15th, 2024. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Judge. I've provided you all with an agenda for today's work session. All of the items in your packets are in the same order as presented. I'll begin with a summary of changes from the initial draft of the fiscal year 24-25 budget that the Commission was given. Number one, we have increased most insurance expense amounts in the categories of building and contents, vehicles, watercraft, and general liability per updated premium projections from CAECO. Number two, real property taxes increased by $300,000 to a total of $9 million. That is in light of PVA's recapitulation of real property tax for 2024. They have a total assessment of $7.92 billion. You would divide that by 100, multiply it by our tax rate of 0.13, and then multiply that by about 0.9 to get to our $9 million. Item three, we have increased the Commonwealth of Kentucky AOC reimbursements line by $3.25 million. And for the expense account, Judicial Center repairs, we've increased that by $0.25 million for a total of $3.25 million so that they equal. That is the Judicial Center HVAC project. AOC has communicated that the project is in their budget at this amount for reimbursement. And item five is other equipment in the park system was reduced by $15,000. That was the removal of one new zero-turn mower due to interdepartmental transfer from the maintenance department. Any questions on any of those changes?
No. No, sir.
Moving on to the budget highlights. Beginning in the general fund revenues are expected to remain steady with a budgeted increase in property taxes of $500,000 from the prior year. Any adjustments to revenues have been increased or decreased in accordance with historical trending activity. The Sheriff's Office subsidy is $3.04 million. The budgeted fund transfer to the road fund is $2.87 million, which is up from last year's $2.83 million. And the budgeted fund transfer to the jail is $3.41 million, which is down from last year's $3.82 million. For the road fund, state reimbursable project amount for flex, bridge funds, and other is $530,000, which is down from $1.02 million last year for projects that have yet to be identified and other resurfacing list projects. Asphalting from the road and LGA funds this year total $1.28 million, which is the same amount as the prior year. For the LGA fund, we are classified as a coal impact county. Our classification did change last year with a decrease in LGA funding of approximately $500,000. A coal impact county must expend 100% of funds in transportation categories, meaning that the $135,000 projected income for fiscal year 24-25 in LGA must be spent entirely on the maintenance of roads. For the jail fund, revenues from the housing of state prisoners are budgeted at $3.4 million based on the trending activity. Federal prisoner revenue is budgeted at $2 million. The budgeted fund transfer from the general fund is $3.41 million, again down from last year's $3.82 million. This decrease is driven primarily by fewer capital projects and the decrease in employer retirement contribution rates. For the Economic Development Fund, the court has awarded funds to several projects since the inception of the fund and will continue to provide funding for fiscal year 24-25. For the Solid Waste Fund, revenues are projected to remain constant and expenses are being managed to allow this fund to continue operating as an enterprise fund, which generates its own operating revenue and pays all expenses with no assistance from the general fund or any tax dollars. Gate rates were adjusted on January 1 of 24, and revenues are occurring at the expected levels. In terms of any budget threats, the following items could have a significant negative impact on the proposed budget's financial performance, which would be unstable fuel and energy prices, inflation and supply chain issues, lower than expected solid waste revenues, and reductions in state funding. Those are our typical budget threats. They remain unchanged. For assumptions for the fiscal year 24-25 budget, we're assuming a COLA of 3.4% for all departments. Retirement percentages for non-hazardous employer contribution rate has decreased from 23.34% to 19.71%. Hazardous employer contribution rate has decreased from 43.69% to 38.61%. We assume that the currently adopted taxes and tax rates will be held constant. which are a property tax rate of 13 cents per $100 of value, occupational tax rate of 1%, and an insurance premium tax rate of 6%. We assume that no additional debt will be issued, and the annual principal reduction of $1.13 million is what we have projected for this budget. The Sheriff's Office subsidy is $3,035,627. They have adopted a 3% COLA, and they will go to the clerk's schedule of adopting the county's COLA on a 6-month lag from now on. The jail fund subsidy is $3,409,812. Road fund subsidy is $2,870,664. Are there any questions on any of those budget highlights?
None for me. Commissioner Condor.
Thank you, Judge. Just as a comment, more than anything else, when Treasurer Johnson throws out the threats to our budget, there is one that is of concern that was, I believe, passed on to the Secretary of State, House Bill 5, known as the crime bill. I believe that if we can have Jailer Maglinger come to fiscal court to address what might be the unintended consequences of that bill, of the enforcement of not only local law enforcement, our sheriff and OPD, but what impact will that bill potentially, it may be hard to quantify, that bill in particular has on local jails. There's been a lot of discussions about what that bill is going to do. Incarcerations are bringing up the rate of individuals or the number of people that go into our jail, and I would respectfully request that the judge consider having Jailer Maglinger present to us what he believes that impact might be. Everything else looks really good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. Mr. Johnson.
Sorry about that. You have in front of you the summary of revenue and appropriations. I will read each appropriation by classification with the total amount appropriated by fund. Each fund has an equal offsetting revenue amount as the budget is balanced. Beginning in the general fund, general government is $12,119,977. Protections to persons and property is $8,086,300.
Drain the microphone.
General health and sanitation is $1,399,000. Social services are $935,000. Recreation and culture is $5,956,750. Transportation services $526,345. Debt service $25,000. Capital projects $10,335,500. General administration $19,409,352. For total general fund appropriations of $58,793,224. For the road fund, roads is $6,529,000. Engineering is $594,900 for a total road fund appropriation of $7,123,900. For the jail fund, protection to persons and property is $11,691,612 with appropriations of the same. Local Government Economic Assistance, or LGEA Fund, all to be spent on road maintenance in the amount of $271,500. Economic Development Fund for project funding, $1,770,000. Bond Fund for debt service, $3,066,500. In the Solid Waste Fund, sanitation operating services, $15,419,900. Debt service fund, $1,050. Closure, $5,510,000. Post-closure, $3,550,000 for total solid waste appropriations of $24,480,950. For the ARPA fund, other capital projects, which is what is remaining on the Connexon contract, a total of $5,500,000. For the county clerk permanent storage fees funds, of which we are simply a custodian of that recording fee, total of $351,000. So total budget appropriations for all funds is $113,048,686. Are there any questions on any of those classifications or categories?
Commissioners, any questions for? No, sir. Thank you.
Moving on to the capital expenditures and departmental work papers. You have the summary of major capital expenditures in front of you. Capital items for the general fund total $11,752,100. Capital items for the solid waste fund total $5,088,200. At this time, I would ask if the court wishes to hold any discussion on any capital project or departmental item.
Any questions, concerns from the commissioners?
No, not for me.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Sorry, Judge. If I could, many of the items that are here are tagged, especially with the considerations for parks. A significant amount of capital expenditures is heading toward the parks, which I believe the Judge Executive and/or Jordan Rowe could probably speak to more in detail. But I really want the public to understand the catching up, getting our parks into really great condition is happening, especially restrooms, different things like that. And first, Judge, thank you for doing it. I mean, it really looks as if we're going to pay attention to our parks. There may be a couple of categories that we may need to discuss in further detail of use here or there, but overall, that is one of the major things that I see as the parks liaison of what's happening at the parks. And Jordan Rowe, your passion is showing up. All the other individuals out at the parks are really working hard to get them in shape, and it's being noticed by Fiscal Court and Judge Caslin. Thank you for doing so.
You're welcome, sir. For what it's worth, just for the benefit of the public, you know, I do know our restrooms out there at Yellow Creek Park are in pretty poor shape. And with that being the premier site for romp, I think it's important for us to make the investment to improve those. Also, we've got a couple picnic shelters. When Mr. Brasher was over the parks, one of the things he did is had somebody come in and do inspections of a number of our buildings, including the shelters, and noted significant, I'll just call them deficiencies that needed to be addressed. That's something he and I had talked about for pretty much since I became Judge Executive, and even in that year of the election cycle, that was something coming down the pike. So this is the year to address those. So anyway, I'm pleased with those things. Any comments from the other commissioners? Next item, Jordan.
Moving on to agency funding grants. You all have had access to the detailed binders containing each application for several weeks for review. Agency funding for the general fund totals $1,439,226. Agency funding for House Bill 202 eligible entities totals $520,000. At this time, I would ask if the court wishes to hold any discussion on any grant funding for any particular agency.
Commissioners, any questions or comments? No. Next item, Mr. Johnson.
I have included a copy of the budget document detailing each revenue source and expense by account. I would ask if the court has any questions on any of these accounts or funds as presented.
Any questions for Mr. Johnson? I hear none.
Moving on to liabilities, there is no assumption of any additional debt being issued in fiscal year 24-25. Total outstanding principal as of July 1 of 24 will be $6,633,823.84. As referenced in the budget highlights, the total annual principal reduction for fiscal year 24-25 will be $1,126,149.11, meaning that as of June 30th of 25, total outstanding principal will be approximately $5.5 million. Are there any questions on the schedule of liabilities?
No, sir.
With that, having reviewed all items, I would request a consensus from the court to move forward in preparing the budget ordinance as presented today.
Commissioners, does he have your consent? We're not voting.
Yes.
but- Okay,
That's my consent.
looks like a yes, sir. Is that it? All right. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.